I've been thinking about music a lot lately, and some of that is the fact that my wife bought me a new guitar, and uh, it just you start thinking about you start building a wish list and going, well, oh, if I could get this, if I could get that, and one of the things that I've been looking at is kind of just like signal chains and tones and frequency. And even though I have no intention to ever play in a band live, anything like that, it's still, I think, important to not only find tones that are good for yourself, but also good to sit in a mix. And all of these are just things that you think about. And so, okay, let me backtrack a little bit. One of the things that I actually find most frustrating in music, and we're talking even music that I absolutely love, I actually find most people's guitar tone not very good. Um, Everybody loves to pick on Dimebag because Dimebag basically had no mids. And hey, I played with no mids for a long time because of that. And in the room, when you're practicing, that can sound great. Doesn't sit in a mix very well. And you basically end up forcing the other instruments to, carve around that in very unnatural places. Mids are very important. We'll get to that in a second. But then on the other side of it, um, you also have, let's say, like look at post Saint Anger Metallica, Mark Tremonti, and it even to a slightly smaller degree like Lamb of God. A lot of these guys, their tone is overly dark and boingy, and I'm saying boingy because like I don't know if it's just from having a flabby low end on their setup, or if it's also from way too much compression. And it's probably a combination of both. Um, but the thing is, like the rigs these guys use are capable of better, crunchier, drier tones. But that brings in something which I think we often forget about, which is just our personal ear. I happen to like, you know, as far as like distortion and stuff goes, happen to like kind of drier, crunchier tones. And I like a lot of brightness. I like presence, and there's something about having them kind of wide open like that. And this is the way that I think about it. And granted, more expensive guitars, better guitars have better tone pots, but a lot of times people's tone kind of sounds like their tone pots are rolled all the way down or part of the way down. And truthfully, a lot of people do play with their tone pots rolled down a bit. And some of that may have started with having overly bright and spanky instruments like Strats and Tellys. I mean, if you look at Fender amps are super dark. I'm just not a fan of Fender amps, but they're kind of designed to go with single coil guitars, and their single coil guitars have quite bright and spanky pickups that kind of need to be tamed a little bit. So a lot of times these guys will roll the tone pot off just to give it a little warmth that it's lacking, and that's fine, right? But then people carry that over to just naturally rolling the tone pot off on a Les Paul or an SG or something like that. And they a lot of times humbuckers, and granted, good humbuckers are nice and clear, but a lot of times cheaper humbuckers are a little on the muddier side. So you roll that tone down, and it doesn't create a great sound. Now, it's not to say that it's unusable, but it might not want to be your bass sound. So one of the things that comes up when people start chasing tone, and right, don't get lost in the rabbit hole that is tone chasing. Because it's kind of an endless hole, and your taste may change, and the way that your hearing notches out over time, and ear fatigue and everything is going to change. But and the fact is that even bands that don't have great tone still have some really, really great songs. I mean, if you like thrash metal, Pantera has some great stuff, even if Dime's tone wasn't great. Mark Tremonti and Alter Bridge have some fantastic, fantastic songs, even if Mark's tone is just insufferably dark and boingy. So like it's not the be all end all. You can have kind of mediocre or even poor tone as long as it's not unlistenable, uh, and do all right for yourself. So one of the things that when people start chasing tone, one of the things that people do is they start with Tonewood. Now, there's a lot of things that go into the tone, to making your tone, and when you're talking an electric instrument, there is a whole signal chain, just a whole massive signal chain that has to be taken into account. And the fact is that, like, yes, Tonewood and resonance absolutely matters on an acoustic instrument. It's going to matter a lot less on an electric instrument just because it's not picking up the acoustics. But I am going to caveat that in just a second. So people get hung up on wood choice, guitar weight, things like that. And people have done amateur experiments, maybe not the most scientific thing or whatever. People have done amateur experiments showing that Tonewood basically doesn't matter, and showing that the weight of the instrument doesn't really matter to the tone or the sustain. And there's a really, really good reason for that. It's not that there's no difference, it's that the difference is not going to be perceivable except by the very most sensitive ears. And the fact is that because those differences are so small, as soon as you introduce any kind of compression, whether it be from, like regular audio compression or from gain, you're going to lose a lot of those dynamics, and you're going to lose a lot of that detail anyway. The first thing is, it's really not about the wood or the weight. Find a guitar that's comfortable to play, that you like, that you enjoy looking at, that plays well, that feels nice and encourages you to play. Because the differences you're going to get in tone and sustain can all be modulated and compensated for in the rest of your signal chain. Now, one thing that we have to be careful with is your signal chain can't really add anything that's not there. It can only modulate and enhance what is there, and it can cut a lot out. So you have to be careful about just throwing it all to the wind, right? You still want to have something that's got a lot of articulation and dynamics in the bass instrument, right? So your playing has to be on point, because if you play poorly, and no amount of equipment is going to make up for that. Okay, so let's go back to the acoustic qualities argument. So the way that guitar pickups work, active pickups are, they're still picking up an electrical field and all that, but active pickups are a different thing. Fishmans are kind of a different thing. But by and large, what we are doing with an electric guitar signal is, in some way, shape, or form, sensing the vibration of the guitar string and translating that into an electrical signal. And the way that traditional pickups work is they create a magnetic field. And the reason that different pickups sound different is that they are wound in ways, different wire, different kinds of bobbins, different spacing, different electrical resistances, all these things. It's going to change the shape of the magnetic field according to the guitar. And so what that magnetic field is able to sense and translate itself is going to be kind of limited just by the physics of magnetic fields. Now, because we are picking up on the actual vibration of the strings, things like the rigidity of the wood and the weight of the wood, even the resonance of the wood, does actually matter to a small degree, because anything that affects the vibration of the string is going to go into exactly what vibration is being picked up by the magnetic field. The problem is that those are all such very small factors that can basically all be compensated for with electronics down the line, that it's not worth worrying about. Now, one thing that does matter a little bit is where the pickup sits in relation to the vibrational nodes on the string. The space that it is from the neck and the space that one is from the bridge, how close they are to the actual points of vibration and all that, is going to change how the pickups sound too. So if you have two otherwise identical guitars with two identical pickups, which isn't really possible, but you have them in slightly different spaces, I mean, we're talking, millimeters off, it's going to actually change how the guitar sounds. And because humans are humans, and because wood is organic and can't exactly be controlled for, what we end up with is there's going to be a lot of small variation inherently in what's going on with it right there. Can you say that maple sounds slightly different from Carina, or whatever? Yeah, sure. But how much that actually matters is very, very small. Now, when you're playing, the guitar does resonate in your hands, and people do complain about a kind of a lifeless feeling guitar versus one that resonates with them. The guitar is communicating with you, or you're communicating through the guitar, so having something that feels a little more alive in your hands does feel better. But by and large, right, even down to whether it's a polyurethane or a nitrocellulose coating on the guitar, is such a minor difference in the way the thing sounds. The only reason that you should be picky about that is in how it feels and how you respond to the instrument, because it's not going to make a big enough difference in sound that can't be compensated for later down the chain. So one last thing on pickups before we move down the chain is the fact that pickups can be voiced, right? It's not just random and arbitrary. Pickups can be voiced for certain frequency responses. And the fact is that a guitar is actually tuned, standard tuning is actually in the vocal bass range, E2 to E4. And that's fine. That's still kind of in the low mids. But then bass harmonics are in the low mids. So you want to kind of punch up the harmonics in the middle mids up a little bit more. Just to help that guitar cut through. So you have different frequency spectrums, and basically there's room to wiggle there depending on the instruments and the players and their ear and how they want to carve out spots for themselves. But it is important for the bass to be heard in the low mids, because the actual bass fundamentals can get lost with the kick drum. So you have to kind of move things up the chain a little bit, and harmonics are super important anyway. I mean, that's exactly what distortion is. Distortion is compression and harmonics. So we want to make sure that everything's getting heard appropriately. So one of the things that helps with that is if you know that a guitar is a mid-forward instrument and that you really want to poke those mids out, and you kind of don't want the honky mids around the 750, 1K range, but you want a good 2K push, and then you want your good lower mid fundamentals and all that. That's fine, but then get pickups that actually will edge you in that direction. And one of the things that people are starting to come back to, but I think was kind of out of vogue, at least in the metal world for a long time, is the fact that you do not need super hot pickups. Like, super hot pickups actually take a lot of detail away from the instrument itself. And look, if you're playing very non-detailed music, then I guess that doesn't matter. But the fact is that you actually want a lot of detail and articulation. A great example is Joe Duplantier from Gojira. He uses fairly low output pickups with a lot of dynamics in them, because his rig is making up the rest of it. So the playing and the instrument are actually very, very articulate and dynamic, which allows him to actually have information that can be shaped down in the mix. So having more information on the front end is really, really useful, so that by the time it gets to the back end, it actually is kind of taking the shape that you want. You're actually sculpting. You have to have more material than you need to be able to appropriately sculpt. John Schaefer, same thing, lower output pickups, and a lot of classic rock bands, lower output pickups. And one of the kind of rules of thumb is higher gain amp, lower output pickups, and then vice versa. If you have a lower gain amp, then you might want higher output pickups because you're just not going to be able to drive the thing with low output pickups. So it just, getting the right equipment is important. Now, one thing to say about cables, right? Get good cables. You don't have to spend a fortune. You don't have to buy Mogamis, right? Hoses are fine, things like that. Yes, cables can act as capacitors, which will basically roll a lot of your tone off after a certain length. Most of us don't have to worry about that, but having a buffer in your chain solves that, and then it's no big deal. So then we get down to the pedal board, right? And some people like to play with a lot of effects. Some people like to play with very few effects. That is all to personal taste. But one of the things that will be greatly to your benefit is having powerful EQ on your board. Now, whether that's having pedals with powerful EQ or having an actual EQ pedal to sculpt your tone, that's going to be really, really beneficial to you. And then on top of that is going to be picking pedals that actually boost and cut the frequencies that you need otherwise. So if you know that like a big muff is going to cut out all your mids, then you might want to throw a tube screamer in with it to punch back some of the mids. Bring that mid scoop up just a little bit so that you don't get completely lost. Or find a fuzz pedal that doesn't scoop out your mids as much, or something else, right? There's so many options, and it just depends on the information that you're starting with and how you can sculpt into that. So like if you play a really, really mid-present guitar, you might not need a tube screamer. The tube screamer might not do you any good, but you could use other kinds of things. And again, an EQ pedal is going to be your friend. And then we get into your amp. And the thing with your amp is like the amp circuit itself is going to have a certain EQ curve on it. I mean, even if it has, every amp has EQ on it, but even if your amp has a very powerful dialable EQ section, the fact is that the circuit is still going to be designed in a certain way, and a lot of rock and metal amps still have kind of a mid scoop in them, which again, if you're playing a very mid-forward guitar, having a mid-scooped amp might not be a bad thing because you've already got a ton of that information, and it may help you dial out some of those honks. But you don't have to have something that is all mid-scooped, right? And you can still kind of boost the mids and all that. You give it the information so that you have material to work with. But the thing that a lot of people forget about, and this is information that's been getting pushed the last year or two. I assume that the recording industry has known this forever, but as far as like guitar YouTube and everything goes, your speakers matter so much. There's a lot of really bad speakers out there. And then there's just a lot of speakers that are appropriate for one kind of music and not appropriate for another kind of music. And again, having a really, mid-present guitar speaker, like a V30 or something, is a really, really good idea, but may not always be appropriate depending on what you're dealing with. So finding the right speakers that work with what you're playing are going to matter a lot. And then if you're recording or if you're miking into a PA system, even the microphone you use is going to shape that a lot. An SM57 is very mid-forward, and then you take classic ribbon mic to go along with it. Those tend to be a little bit darker and more scooped and all that, and that's fine. That's why you blend mics and all that. But there are so many pieces that go into that signal chain. And it really, really isn't and can't be just about, is my guitar the right wood or the right weight? Again, so it comes down to like, pick something that is comfortable to play, something that you like looking at. The aesthetics matter, right? I will never own a Telecaster. I hate the way that Telecasters look. They are the ugliest guitars out there. Short of some purposefully just ugly pieces of art. But I don't know, a Telecaster looks, if you turn it upside down, it looks like a fat man hanging his junk out to air. I don't like it. Or if you want to be a little bit less graphic, it kind of looks like an elephant that belongs on the short bus. It's just an ugly guitar. So one of the things that we have to consider, when buying our guitars is this something that I want to look at, right? So it has to be comfortable to play. It should be nice looking, something that you like to look at and are proud to have, and it should be something that inspires you to play. But the thing is that your tone is going to be coming from the way you play and everything in that signal chain. So the sound of the guitar is really not going to be coming from the weight or the wood. It's going to be coming from the way you play and the entire signal chain. If you need more sustain, more gain, more compression, you'll get all the sustain you want. There are ways to do it that are nice and clean if you want clean sounds, and there are ways to do it that are nice and grimy if you really like dirty sounds. And if you want something that's brighter or darker or whatever, you can do that with your pickups, your pedals, and your amp. So really, at the end of the day, it comes down to find something that you like to play, and it really doesn't have to be expensive. When we look at kind of the point of diminishing returns on guitars, the cheaper stuff is getting better. It is. But for the most part, the point of diminishing return seems to be around the knee on that curve, seems to be around the $500-ish mark. There are some really great pieces down around the 300s, and there are some, some pieces in the 8 to 900 that are very, 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 very good. So if you do that kind of sweep, between $3 and $8 or $3 and $900, about $500 is about kind of where you see the knee on that curve, and you can get something really, really great. And if you're going to be playing with your pickups and stuff like that too, anyway, there's no reason to spend a lot of money if you're going to be modding the thing. So, and I like to modify things. So it's one of the reasons I don't like to spend a lot of money on guitars, because I want to be able to, change out the pickups, change out the pots, kind of customize things to myself. Most of the time, it's not that a guitar can't be just picked up off the shelf and played great. It's more like I have a specific thing I'm looking for, and I pretty much can't get that stock. And I certainly don't want to pay somebody custom money for it, and I like to tinker with things. So it makes more sense for me to spend $300 to $500 on something that I am going to enjoy and be able to modify without, risk of, just in case I screw it up or something, risk of being out $4,000 or anything like that. But yeah, what it really comes down to is, do you like playing what you have? Does it inspire you to play? Does it make you want to play more? Because if it does, then that's good enough. Fill out the rest of the chain. Worry about that more than the guitar you have. So, provided the thing's not just unplayable. If it's just unplayable, obviously that's not going to be any good. All right, I will talk to you guys later. Good journey.
Chocolate-covered laser discs, flashing like a dagger in the night.